Hey everyone, welcome back to Jukebox. This is the third and final installment in our Pan Am inspired destination wedding invitation suite. And in this video, we're going to be focused on some letterpress printing as well as die cutting to make a vintage inspired luggage tag. And if you haven't seen parts 1 or parts 2 in this series, please take a look in the description below for a link because you're going to want to get caught up with everything we've made so far. So without further ado, let's get printing.
Let's begin by inking up our printing press with an oil-based metallic printing ink. We'll be printing with Pantone 877 silver and the same 3538 blue that we used in part 1 and 2. Here's the first of 3 copper dies we'll be printing with today. I'll mount the die onto our boxcar base and then lock the chase into the press. I'm going to take the first impression onto a thin text weight sheet to see a proof of what we'll be working with. Using this sheet, I'll determine the size of my press sheet and whether or not the artwork will need to be straightened out. The Heidelberg T-Platen only has one side guide, so I will need to make sure the press sheet has an equal margin on both sides to accommodate for two-sided printing. For this, it's imperative to back trim our paper stock. Over at the paper cutter, I'll trim my sheets down to size. I'll also prepare the press by taking an impression on our make-ready patch sheet. This spot sheet is then tucked under our tympan sheet. The luggage tag that we're making today will be printed on a 20-point coated paper stock. This paper stock is much thicker than our initial proofing paper, so I'll be sure to back the press up by a substantial amount before I take the first impression. At first glance, I can see the ink is laid down fairly evenly with some patchy areas that will require some adjustment. By building up the uneven areas on the spot sheet with small feathered tissue paper, I can level out the impression and the ink coverage until the artwork is printing crisp, clean, and solid. A closer look at the metallic ink shows just how much shine the silver pigment is able to produce. It's a little more subtle when compared to foil stamping with silver foil, but the results are still impressive. We're ready to print. For the reverse side of the print, I'll place the second die in the same position on the base as the first, but rotate it 180 degrees. The first proof of this die pressing onto the sheet shows that I'm getting fairly consistent coverage of ink, but my impression could increase to help the solid areas improve. Taking a look at the registration, I've made a cut into each crop mark to see how the print has backed up onto the first pass. The final die cut for this hang tag will cause any misregistration to be glaringly obvious, so it's critical that I dial in the positioning perfectly. With a slight increase in pressure on the press, I can see that our ink is looking solid and clean. I'm happy with how this looks, so I'd say we're ready to run. Now that we're finished with our 877 silver ink, we're going to move on to setting up our third printing plate. For this pass, we're going to be printing Pantone 3538 blue and match our registration with the first pass of ink that we started with. The appearance of this color on a coated paper stock will look a little different than the uncoated papers that we were using in parts 1 and part 2 of this video series. The paper you print with will always have an influence on the ink color that you're working with. Our first impression into the paper stock shows just how off the registration is. The targets should be landing perfectly on top of each other. To fix this, I'll make a small adjustment to the side guide on the press. This will change where the sheet lands in relation to the printing plate and bring the silver printed artwork into position. After this adjustment, you can see that our targets and crop marks are all landing perfectly. It's time to set up our paper stock and get printing. With our printing finished up, I'll next clean up the press. The last step will be to die cut the luggage tags into their final form. I've set up a steel rule cutting die into a chase, positioned by eye for a rough estimate at registration. Locking up a chase like this is far from ideal, but I still find that it's more sturdy and reliable than trying to fill the chase with rows of furniture that tend to buckle or bow under the tension of a coin. While setting up the die cutting pass, I try to start with just enough pressure such that the steel rule die leaves a light impression into the sheet without cutting through at all. It's always good to start with less pressure so that you do not dull the cutting die unnecessarily. The impression here shows just how off the registration is. I'll measure the difference using my pico pole and move the furniture in the chase to reposition the cutting die into register. With the steel rule die now landing in place, we can take a closer look at the registration. I'll now increase the pressure by just a couple notches on the press and run another sheet through. The card is cut in cleanly and the registration is dead on. Before we take a final look at everything we've made across all three parts of this video series, let's have a look at some of the original Pan Am ephemera that inspired this entire wedding suite. We have an original passenger ticket and baggage check booklet, which features some interesting transfer papers, crash numbering, and watermarks for security. We adapted many of the typefaces and design elements to make our invitation suite as convincing as possible. This original Pan Am stamp features a cool graphic of the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser airplane.
So that wraps up this extensive 3-part series where we create a Pan Am inspired destination wedding invitation suite. For those of you who haven't seen part 1 or part 2, please be sure to check out the description below, as there will be a link to both of those videos and you gotta watch those to get caught up. And of course, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our subscribers and anyone who leaves a comment or asks a question or hits that like button. We really do appreciate the support and would also appreciate if all of you guys subscribe too. You don't want to miss anything that's coming up. We do have a lot more videos on the way. So thank you for watching and we'll see you next time.